What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you with the one, the only, Mr. Mort Jensen of Yahoo Sports fame, the NBA podcast fame, Sports Illustrated fame, and I always forget one of the four. What's the other one?
Which one did you mention? I don't like Sports Illustrated, Forbes, Yahoo.
Oh, I forgot Forbes. So
Right.
Forbes fame too.
Okay.
Mort does a whole lot and does it super well. We are here for one of our trademark crossovers to talk about, are these teams contenders or not? Feels like a good time to take stock of these teams post-trade deadline. We're going to do Eastern Conference this round, and then we will do Western Conference later on in the week. It's just an interesting thought exercise to do at this time of year. But first and foremost, Mort, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm getting a little sick of like my backdrop because we moved in December, and we're still waiting for like a closet to be delivered. So right now my office is just like basically let's put all the crap that we have not organized yet in there. So I'm like, I want to get a proper setup now. So I'm like a little frustrated. But outside of that, I'm tired, Dan. As well, Danny, we just got over the trade deadline and I worked my ass off, which, look, it's fun. It's always fun to do the trade deadline, but my God, you are just bombed for like 3 days at the very least, especially after this one.
Right, and you need the All-Star. You can see players need the All-Star break with the number of just absences we're getting in the games leading up, which is why it makes this exercise, it's fun, but it's also sort of challenging because we just don't have the samples with, as we're recording this, Luka's going to make his debut tonight for the Lakers. We've seen, 2 De'Aaron Fox games in San Antonio. So there's just like Chris Middleton hasn't even played in Washington yet.
3 games already, I think. Yeah.
I saw 2. So there you go. So this is just a tough time of year to get a hold of stuff. And there's also, I don't know if you've seen this before, there's a lot of noise this time of year where I think a lot of people associate it with the end of the season, and I tend to agree with them. But I believe it was ESPN's Kevin Pelton did some sort of a study a few years ago and found out that like the stretch, like January basketball specifically, so like we're only just removed from that, is like the most meaningless when it comes to kind of determining long-term trends or like, is this for real? And so that makes it so tough because you're so inclined to be like, the calendar flipped. How has this team been doing since January 1? And then it's, well, do I just dismiss everything that I've seen right now? Yeah. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on these teams. And if you're ready, let's dive into the Eastern Conference.
Absolutely, sir.
First up, according to the alphabet, Mort, the Boston Celtics. Here, look, this is a tough question for you, but I'm going to ask it.
Yeah.
Is this team a championship contender?
Absolutely not. Complete pretender. Like, I don't even know how they won last year. No, of course. When you have that type of defense, when you have that type of 3-point volume, obviously. So I actually want to turn this into like a real discussion because we could basically just, skim through this one. They haven't really played up to their usual standards over the last month and a half, but like we agree that that's just basically them saying, look, we are going to sacrifice periods of time during the regular season just to ramp up for the playoffs, right? Like, because I can't imagine that we should take this last month and a half seriously.
No, I can't either. And there are 2 things, and they're quick things that I think people have pointed to that I just keep, you dig into it, and it's just right. Maybe it doesn't look great all the time, but the numbers are what the numbers are. And people are worried about, they feel like their defensive gear just doesn't have it. Boston is 6th in the league in points allowed per possession against top 10 offenses. That is, and if you do top 20 offenses, they're still like in the top 5. So I can't bring myself to care about that. And then the offense can bog down sometimes, and it's why aren't they operating with more urgency, or it feels too predictable? More, they have the best half-court offense in the NBA against top 10 defenses. And so I think there probably are fair concerns to point to with this team, but they have the vitals of a title contender because guess what? The reigning NBA champion, that is a little banged up. You look at Tatum and Brown and Drew Holiday, they're a title contender. Isn't that shocking?
Completely. They just added Torrey Craig. I really like that for him. I really do. I know that he's not, what he used to be. He's getting older as well, but he's tough as nails. Yep. And he's a guy you can put into like, oh, wait a second. Before I get ahead of myself here, he's still playoff eligible, right? The cutoff's March 1st, right?
Yeah. He will.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
He should be, he'll be starting over Drew Holiday at some point, right? You would imagine. Yeah.
No, but for real, like if let's say Drew actually goes down and you have to like start, an untraditional starting lineup in the playoffs, you can actually rely on a guy like Torrey Craig. You can rely on him to play those mistake-free minutes where you can trust the defense. You can trust some of the shot making. You can also trust that he will attack at an open paint. Like, I just think that's a spooky, under the radar addition for them. So just, I have no worries whatsoever. I do wonder, like, if you know how in journalism you have the red team that always has to like poke through a story to figure out like, you know, what are the holes here?
Yeah.
I wonder what would be like a red team exercise for Boston. Like, how can you beat them?
How can you beat them? I think.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know. When you look at them on paper, if everyone's healthy, it's tough to like come off with like an ingredient for like success of how to beat them. I think if you look at the way they've played, especially during some of their tougher stretches, you can maybe see some cracks. And it's a lot of people focused on, okay, what is Jaylen Brown shooting from three? And then like some of the, even though the data is not always going to support this, like some of the minutes without Tatum have just not looked great for Boston. But you're not going to beat them when Tatum's off. Like Tatum's going to play a bunch in the postseason. If you look at, I guess the best way to frame it would be, well, then what is the team, whether it's the East or the West, that you look at and say, well, like they seem as if they're built to beat Boston. But I ultimately think that it needs to be a team where there's at least three guys who are just, they're not like, not even not liabilities, but they're active assets against Boston's perimeter personnel. And it can't come at the expense of like your offensive dynamism. And Cleveland comes close, of course, because of they have Allen and Mobley, and now they have Hunter. They also have, if Dean Wade's healthy, they have Isaac Okoro if he's healthy. But then it's like they do have some pressure points on defense. Like Donovan Mitchell's defended a lot better this year. Darius Garland shoulders a lot of tough assignments. But like even that team feels like, and Cleveland's been spectacular this year, don't get me wrong. Even that team just, I wouldn't call it a recipe for beating Boston. Do you have like do you have a recipe, or is there like a matchup in mind, especially in the
OKC? OKC for me, because of the defense alone right there. I do think they would have been a little bit more dangerous if they gotten some more shooting in over the course of the trade deadline. But like that is the one team, because they also have the size. I think that is one area you can go in and influence it all. Like winning the rebound game. Like I know that people within the analytics community have grown very sour on rebounding and saying it's overrated. I just can't get there, Dan. Maybe I'm like leaning into my boomerism. I'm not sure, but like I am still in love with quality rebounding. I think rebounding is so essential, especially in the playoffs. So for them to, trot out Chet Holmgren, Isaiah Hartenstein, and also have quality rebounders at different positions, that to me would be a major possible advantage. The question is, though, with Boston taking, 53s per game, some of those are going to go long, and then that sort of negates at least the interior rebounding. So I kind of hope we get those two teams in the finals, because I think just from a basketball perspective, like pure basketball in terms of like day-to-day adjustments, schematics, just the preparation level, it'll be porn for us, just outright porn.
I do think, and we're going to get to Cleveland in a second, like if you're just a fan of like good basketball or want the best matchups possible, like remove your fandom from the equation, not you specifically, of course. Like it needs to be Boston or Cleveland coming out of the East right now. It's just like those are the teams that you look at as the standard bearers for real title contenders. I don't think, spoiler alert on Cleveland, or I guess some of the teams to come, there's just not anyone other in the East that's near those two. Do you have, before we move on from Boston, like just, it's an easy exercise. We're kind of like trying to nitpick here. Would you be more concerned whether it's against OKC or not? Like, where is Boston most beatable? Is it on their offense, to where it's, okay, if the threes aren't falling, they're not necessarily a team that draws a ton of free throws. They don't generate a ton of rim pressure with their personnel. And those, by the way, those are two areas where people like to point to Jason Tatum, but he's just gotten better in like those areas over time. So it's not him specifically. Or is it, you look at the defense and it's like, okay, some of those lineups aren't going to have a ton of size. And do you have the same flexibility, to size up against some, whether it's an OKC or whether it's a Cleveland?
No, it's definitely the shooting. It's definitely one of those. Could you imagine just them going in, like, let's say it's the finals against the Thunder, and let's see over the first two games, Boston goes like, I don't know, like 8 for 28, but they'll take 28 shots from range.
That's like first quarter.
That's for like the quarter. But like, okay, so they might go like, I don't know, 12 for 48, right? if they if they have 2 of those games, they're very, very beatable. And then suddenly the Thunder are up 2-0 because you can absolutely utilize that to your advantage. So I think that's the answer. The potential shooting disparity.
We move on to the Cleveland Cavaliers now that Dan has his mic plugged in. Everybody can get excited. Mort, here's another just really tough question for you to answer here.
Right.
Are the Cleveland Cavaliers a contender post-trade deadline?
Oh, I think they were before. Look, can we just talk about like DeAndre Hunter ending up there, how big of a slam dunk that is? Like, I understand that there's a concern at times about 1, his health, and 2, oh, is this like an outlier year? But like something clicked in that man before the season. Something clicked. Like he was always, decent. I think the entire narrative of him being overpaid, like, yes, he was overpaid, but I think it grew to such extents where you kind of forgot there was a player in there as well. Like he's a player and a perfectly fine player. This year, he's certainly not overpaid by any stretch of the imagination. He found his not just his shot volume, his shot diet, his shot profile. He kind of polished that off. It worked. I'm super impressed with how he's looked all year. I was shocked to see him get moved. I thought Atlanta was like, all right, now we're getting real good value here. I guess they were to the point where they were like, let's cash in. But that's just great for Cleveland. This was like sort of their missing link in a way. I always felt like they had wings, but none of them were really like of the same caliber or close to the 2 guards and the 2 bigs. Now you have sort of a bridge from your front court to your back court. I love this acquisition a ton.
Yeah, with that, Grant and I talked about that. That's maybe the one move at the deadline that impacts the actual championship race more than any other move. And look, they had some viable options. I think Dean Wade is great, but like you can't rely on him for his health. And then you needed someone who was maybe not needed, but you would prefer someone who's higher offensive volume, and that would be Hunter. And even some of we didn't talk a lot about this, even some of his flaws in Atlanta, which he's reined in, like that's a dude who he will try and do some one-on-one stuff. It's not a huge part of his game anymore, which is good, but to have that option, that flexibility, to have we talked a lot about the lineup optionality now too. It just sliding him up to the 4 in 1 big lineups. It's just a lot easier and makes a lot more sense than doing the same thing with a Dean Wade or a Max Strus or even an Isaac Okoro. So you were right. They were a contender beforehand. And I think they're such a no-brainer contender. I think especially when you look at the way that Evan Mobley has played at both ends this year, if you had to, sort of poke the needle and say, okay, well, we did this with Boston. Like what is sort of their potential undermining flaw?
In terms of like trying to find what type of weakness they have?
Yeah, like what would you be most concerned about in a playoff series or leading into the postseason in general?
So I guess when you have your offense, the vast majority of your offense being created by 2 undersized guards, there's always this fear of when you're matched up against bigger players, like can you sustain a high level of efficiency throughout the course of a full playoff series? Mitchell, to his credit, always seems to somehow, some way find his way. I think Garland this year looks more primed than ever to do the same. But both those guys are still like 6'1", 6'2", to the point where I'm like, we can't keep like ignoring that. I'm not saying it's going to be their downfall, not by a long shot, but it is something where you're kind of like, let's just keep that in the back of our heads. Like if you're going up against Boston, for example, like how tall is Drew? Like 6'3", 6'4", and he's a bulldog. You have Derek White, who's like 6'5", 6'6", and he's quick. He's got long arms. It's those type of guys can at least affect shooting percentages a great deal. Yeah. So I'm going to say the size of the backcourt without being like too critical, because that sounds like a major point of criticism for the Cavs, but like don't make it sound like that is the one thing that could fall apart. Like there are different areas. Like these 2 are going to produce. It's not like they're going to go into the playoffs and average 14 points per game. Like they're going to get their 20, 25 maybe even, but it's going to be on potentially inconsistent shooting percentages from game to the game.
I think you're focusing on the right stuff too, because a lot of people might flip that and worry about them defensively, like that small guard backcourt in the playoffs. And it's through two kind of postseasons, we have proof of concept that like the Cavs are mostly going to have enough around them defensively.
Yeah.
And so the question to me should be on offense. And the only thing I would add is what can make life harder on those guys aside, like, yes, if you're going up against Boston or certain defenders, what does the supplementary 3-point shooting around them look like? Like what type of space are they working? Because we've seen Evan Mobley was kind of hot from three. I think he's at like 31.5% since January 1. Ty Jerome has fallen off a little bit percentage wise. Right. So you kind of have to look at and say, okay, like is Hunter going to be making his threes? Is Max Strus? He's been hitting his threes. How many minutes can you get away with Sam Merrill defensively? Yeah. And then also like, is Dean Wade going to be taking and making his threes? And so I think that's a real sort of fascinating element for them. They come close to their record is better as of right now. I think they have a strong case though, like throw that out the window and there's going to be the track record to trust Boston more. Cleveland has a real case as they should be the favorite to come out of the East, because I think that's how, one, good they were before, but two, how much sense that DeAndre Hunter acquisition makes to me.
The fact that you have a guy who's like a prototypical wing big in Hunter who can play both forward spots, and you can play him in both big lineups, small lineups, like you can squeeze a solid 30 minutes out of him, no problem if you want to. And the fact that he can take over those possessions, as you alluded to previously, like he'll take you one-on-one and he'll not hesitate to pull up from three too. You need, I don't know if this is the right wording, but like he's sort of a release valve in that sense. Like if those two guards are just being bottled up by tough defense, he's a guy you can sort of pass to and say, all right, for the next couple of minutes, make something happen at the very least. And look, also, I think we're kind of underselling Jared Allen's offense occasionally. Like, I know this year he's only, 13, 14 points per game, something along those lines. He's been far more, like, opportunistic than ever before. But that, like, undersells his skill set as a scorer. Like, he's got a really good sense of scoring in the post. He's got a surprisingly adept, like, both hook shots and push shots. He's got a little bit of a jumper. He's a guy who I think almost intentionally they've not gone to a whole lot this year. So in the playoffs, when things get bottled up, he's a guy who suddenly goes, oh, you know what? I forgot. I can actually go for 25 in a game or two. So I do think they have some answers.
I think, though, and I would agree with everything you said, a lot of his stuff, though, would be predicated on, so DeAndre Hunter is an example. The same type of space isn't going to be available to him if defenses don't care about leaving Hunter, who is shooting like 32% from three since January 1. Again, how much do you read into that when Hunter's still at, I think he's still at like 39% for the season or something like that.
Yeah, he had a horrible January, just a horrible.
Which is, that might have contributed to why because I saw a lot of that trade being framed as if this was this past summer, the Hawks would have killed to get this return. And my whole point was, well, it's not this summer. And so if that was the best available out there, I simply would have kept him. But maybe the team that's trading away the player usually has more information on them than anyone. And so I'm fascinated to see if there's something we're missing there, specifically about his playoff viability. But that looms as just a home run acquisition. I've said it like a dozen times at this point. Are you ready to venture into more of the land of the unknown, though?
Always.
The Indiana Pacers, who I don't think, if you and I had recorded this a couple months ago, they probably wouldn't even have made the list. I'm even on, not even record, but on this podcast, I said, I'm sure this is verbatim, I am out on the 2024-2025 Indiana Pacers. And they get Nembhard back. Halliburton had started playing better even before that. They have the vitals of a contender for like quite some time now. What do you make of them and their threat level in the Eastern Conference specifically?
Oh, I've been super impressed with them. Before they went to Paris, and I went down there to cover that whole thing, they were on an absolute hot streak. And even Rick Carlisle, who can be one of the most skeptic people like to interview ever, he had a bit of a skip in his step going into press conferences before the games, and I'm
trying to imagine him skipping now.
Yeah, no, yeah, well, that was more mentally skipping, if anything. But like he was like joyful. He was playing around with the media, which that doesn't really happen with great regularity, I think. Mm-hmm. And whenever I was at every press conference there, whether it was Hallie, Siakam, Mathurin, all those guys, there is a sense of, oh yeah, we believe we belong. Like we are absolutely here and we deserve to be here. Like that, there is a confidence level that I was very surprised for them to showcase. I think they have a great cohesion there, and I might be a little bit simplistic in this, but I always appreciate teams where the hierarchy is like pretty set. So like, Tyrese is going to run the show. Siakam's going to be like the secondary. Matherin's going to be, playing off of those two. Miles is going to be more of a floor spacer. He's not going to take guys off the dribble. Like, people know their roles. Role acceptance to me is major. And it seems like this entire team is just, yep, we know. Like, we all know what our roles is. Like, my name is Obi Toppin. I'm supposed to shoot threes and dunk and not a damn thing else. Like, I think that's a great way to get on the same page. And when you have that cohesion, when you have that understanding of who you are as both as a team and individuals, frankly, yeah, you're probably going to shock a couple teams along the way.
Yeah, they're a fascinating case study, because when you start to get after Boston and Cleveland, I think a lot of people are just going to default to the Knicks there. And I really do think that territory is more wide open than just defaulting to any team as the third best team in the East. I think even people are just going to give, oh, Milwaukee's healthy. Kyle Kuzma changes everything for them. I'm making a joke there. So I don't know what to make of them relative to the playoff discussion. I do think, while I've been impressed by some of the things I've seen from a Benedict Mathurin, a Ben Shepherd, even some moments from Obi Toppin, for them, to me, I really think it's going to come down to, like, your best 5-man unit needs to be, like, we know what the 4 is, like Siakam, Turner, and Halliburton and Nembhard. And I really think, like, the 5th most important player on this team is and needs to be Aaron Nesmith. And so what does he look like? What do you look like, not just defensively from him, but when your 2 best defenders, perimeter defenders anyway, are probably Nembhard and Nesmith, which skews a little small. And even as they've kind of been on this tear, like, the rebounding for this team still isn't great. But I do think that they're once again showing, and I think Siakam's a huge part of this, their ability to just score in different ways on offense, even when things slow down. They have the 2nd highest best half-court offense against top 10 defenses this year. And that's, so, like, we're not just talking about the transition opportunities and the speed that they can generate. I think that they are perhaps better built than ever, just because now they have more time with Siakam, and even the stuff we've seen from Nembhard. It feels like their offense is more postseason proof than it even was before.
I hear you on the Nesmith point that he kind of needs to be the 5th guy. I would argue the door is open for Ben Shepherd. So he does a lot of the stuff that, don't get me wrong, like, I don't think he's dirty. I want to, like, just fully.
Oh boy.
No, he's not. No, he's not. Like, but he does those things where he gets into, the frustration level of the opponents, right? Like, he'll throw a shoulder, he'll bum someone after the whistle, like, he'll do some of that stuff. I think that is equally important in the playoffs as well. Like, just having that guy who's just want to stir shit up and be that type of guy. And does that make him more important than Aaron Nesmith? Probably not unless he suddenly becomes far more, like, volume oriented in his 3-point shooting. But I do like the defense. I do like his game overall. I also like Aaron Nesmith off the bench as a sort of like a 2-way wing where size might not be as big of an issue. Because
they both, him and Shepherd are both 6'6"?
They're both 6'6", but Ben Shepherd, in my opinion, plays bigger in many ways.
Which is, I think you're right, but which is weird, because Ben Shepherd is listed as like 40 pounds lighter than Nesmith. But right. I think your point is, I actually agree with what you're saying. I want to make that clear.
So what is he listed at? 190? That has to be wrong. I walked past him in Paris. That has to be wrong.
But I think Nesmith is listed at 215, 220. Did he bridge that gap just yet? But even back to Ben Shepherd's first summer league, there was like that dude just like guarding big. So like and this is like, Nesmith has not been shooting the ball great, at least from beyond the arc since coming back. I probably still trust him more as a shooter, which is probably why I default to him as okay. But I guess, does it bode well for them that you would think, or that we believe, that the argument for how that 5th spot can be filled out is more debatable than, it needs to be this guy?
Yeah, I think it is. And by the way, this is not in any way related to like playoff chances and whatnot. I've been looking for, I go on Basketball Reference all the time. So, the players' headshots are in there for the entire season. I think even going back to last year, I was like, who does Ben Shepherd remind me of? And then it hit me just last week. Chandler Hutchinson. Are those two twins? Like, what the hell?
Are you trying to denigrate Ben Shepherd, or are you just commenting on his appearance?
I'm thinking we have one of those Woody Harrelson, Matthew McConaughey situations on our hands where they might actually genuinely be brothers, where we don't know. Like that is uncanny. Uncanny, Dan.
So, contender? Are they a contender? Could you see this team? And I would say, like, not even a confidence meter, but they would have to have more, and we don't want to add all this up, and it needs to be 100% exactly.
Right.
Do they have more than, like, a 10% chance or something of making the conference finals? Again, in the East.
Right. Can I hedge my bet a little bit?
Nope, I'm not going to let you. But yes, you can.
All right, because I'm going to. I think this kind of boils down to Tyrese. This is, like, the most simplistic thing ever. He's been at what, like, 18-9, I want to say, something along those lines. Not even 18, and 8.5. Oh god. If he steps a little more up to that challenge of being like that dude, who averaged 26 and 12 over the first half of last season, for example, I think your odds of making it into Mort and Dan, championship equity territory increases dramatically. So if during the second half of this regular season, Hallie is like, all right, like I've just kicked the back seat for the first half of the year. Now I'm back to being, that guy. Yeah, I'm going to call them a championship contender.
I think I'm going to call them, this is relative to the East, and maybe you could just sit there and say that they are, like there's only two contenders in the East, if that's like real legitimate contenders. I think I have more faith in them than the Knicks. I believe that when you look at what their biggest flaws are supposed to be, both of these teams, you would say on the defensive end, I think we've just seen maybe not like a higher peak gear, but a more sustainable peak gear from Indiana on the defensive end.
That's interesting.
And there's more depth there for them to play around with. Even though I really believe that it needs to be Nesmith, is like if you're looking for that, let's close out the final 5-man lineup. And that's where I'm at with Indy. So I guess I would say that makes them a contender, which is just nobody should trust that, given what I said about Indiana 2.5 months ago.
So basically, this entire Indiana exercise has just been completely moot. Great.
This is just me, like, sort of paying my penance for having dismissed them for the entire year. Our next team up, though, after the Pacers, is the Miami Heat, who prior to the Jimmy Butler trade, Mort, I don't think they're sitting there as we record this, but they're going to have more bodies available. They had gotten, like, into 6th place in the East, and they're a fascinating team. I know it's not pertinent to this exercise, but they need to make the playoffs so that they can convey that pick to OKC and don't set up years in 26 and 28 when they're going to owe 2 unprotected picks out. Are they, based off what you've seen from Bam Adebayo, from Tyler Hero, now they were going to add Wiggins, and Davion Mitchell's super interesting as part of hashtag Heat culture, and of course Kyle Anderson, Khalil Ware, like that element next to Bam. How do you feel about this team?
I'm of two minds of this team. I'm almost at that point where I'm like, just go make the playoffs so you don't relinquish that draft pick, and then in the summer make a rebuild, or not necessarily a full-on rebuild, like a retool process, perhaps. Even though I wouldn't honestly be opposed to a full teardown necessarily for Miami. It's never going to happen while Pat Riley is there, but I'm wondering, like, what is the upside with this team, even with Wiggins? Like, who is that guy? Like, history tells us you need to have that guy to go to the finals, to make, to become a champion. Do they have that? I don't think so. And because they don't have that dude, I'm a little bit skeptical.
Yeah, and I think specifically, if we were to isolate it to one end of the floor, they don't have that guy on offense. As good as Tyler Hero has been this year, and as good as Bam Adebayo could be, I think Bam Adebayo, even at his peak, we've kind of long since known, okay, this is not going to be someone who can headline your offense really at any point, maybe for tiny stretches, but he's even struggled like when you just want him to do things without Jimmy Butler. And this year, their offense, when Bam and Tyler Hero play without Jimmy Butler, their offense is in the 15th percentile. And Andrew Wiggins doesn't. He'll space, hit threes. He's more plug and play than ever. He'll fit their defensive motif. And that's why they're interesting, is that this team, like, they can be super big. Like, if you want to play Wiggins, Khalil Ware, and Bam Adebayo, that's pretty jumbo. And I know Bam Adebayo is not conventionally huge, but he can play huge.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. And like when we say they're missing that guy, is that if you needed a best, you don't want him to be a defensive liability, but at least you can say, okay, well, we have like someone who could anchor a championship defense.
Right.
They just don't have that player who can spearhead a championship offense.
Right. They don't have a Damian Lillard. No, I'm sorry.
Look, did you enjoy like kind of just watching from afar the Portland media trailing the Miami like response? Like, they should just send Jimmy to where he wants to go. Like, he's earned it. As like someone who had like no stake in that race, I very much enjoyed seeing that.
Look, I love all that. I love the spiciness. By the way, I realized the other week that Khalil Ware ranked first, like on FanDuel and whatnot, like those places, as a Rookie of the Year candidate. Like, what the hell?
Right. But like, I was actually thinking about this too. And part of it was just like the stuff we've seen from Justin Edwards. And if AJ Mitchell is going to be held again, like putting together all rookie teams this year, we've already done it twice on this podcast, is going to be a bloodbath. And I don't know that it's necessarily a compliment to the rookie class, but it's just sort of like these guys just get like Khalil Ware wasn't even on the periphery for like a quarter of the season. And now I did not see that he was a favorite to win rookie.
No, I mean, he's awesome. I liked him a ton coming into the draft, a ton. I actually thought he was the guy the Pelicans should just go above and beyond to go find, because I think his fit with Zion would have been ridiculous.
Are you saying he could have saved their season?
I'm not saying he couldn't. Let's just put it that way. I'm not saying he couldn't. No, but I'm saying, like, for a team that's so dramatically has missed the point of how to build around Zion in the right way, that was a guy who would have fitted. It's funny, right? Because we're talking about that guy, them not having that guy. If Khalil Ware next year becomes that guy, so many of their issues just kind of solve themselves.
Do you think that he can be that guy for them on offense?
That's the question, right? Because he is reliant on others setting him up. And like, do they have that guy who can also play on the ball for 35 minutes per game, who can consistently break down a defense and dish it off? Like, that's not Tyler Hero. That's definitely not Terry Rozier. Like, that's the thing. They need some cohesion here. I don't know how you'll optimize him, even though he can be a tremendous center. Like, do they have the guard play to optimize his situation?
It's just certainly Terry Rozier is not going to help out there.
Right.
And they're even, what I think is tough for someone like him, and maybe even that front court moving forward, is they haven't, I know Wiggins can shoot, but just when you look at some of the guys, like, are they going to play Davion Mitchell and Kyle Anderson a ton? Like, those are not two guys that are going to space for you. This team is definitely built to raise defensive hell, but part of just like for someone like a Khalil Ware or even like Bam Adebayo at points, or just other secondary guys, is how much space do they have to operate or to work away from the ball? And if teams are just okay kind of leaving so many people on Miami, who's like, who are you? It's Tyler Hero, and then who else are you worried about, like, really burning you from the perimeter right now? Nobody?
No one.
So that would be my biggest question for them, and I would say I do not have them as a contender.
I don't either, and I do think they have some pretty big questions to ask themselves over the course of summer. Also, just flying on the radar a little bit, slightly concerned about Jaime Jaquez the second year. Like, I thought the moon of him last year, and not sure what the hell happened.
Yeah, even him and Pods both. And even though Pods has played since he came back from injury, like, he's looked a lot better. So, and it's come over like a semi-extended period of time. I feel like Jaime Jaquez has not had that type of a stretch, especially on offense this year. Maybe I'm missing something, but yeah, I think it's totally fair to sort of have that discussion.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't trust Miami whatsoever. I think they should do whatever they can to. It's so weird, right? Let's get into the playoffs so we can lose our draft pick. But like, that's the situation we're in. It makes a lot of sense. Go do it, and then over the course of summer, maybe have a heart-to-heart with Pat Riley and go, look, we know that you don't want to rebuild, old man. We get it, but might be time.
It could, yeah, they're going to be a team to watch over the offseason for sure. Next team on the docket, Mort, the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah.
Are they a title contender? And before we say that,
all right,
does it shock you to know that they have the second worst defense against top 20 offenses for the year? So for the entire year, I'm not filtering out anything there.
It actually does surprise me. Yes,
I was a little bit, honestly, I was shocked when they were that low.
Look, there's no question that their defense throughout the course of the season has been inconsistent, but that number that's definitely surprising. Yeah, you read that right?
It's filtered. If cleaning the glass filters out garbage time too, so that's not even. Wow. There can be early garbage time, of course, but
God,
yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, that's concerning. And how long is Giannis out? Was like 4 weeks, or
he's through the All-Star break at least.
Oh, okay, that's not necessarily too bad. Yeah.
Their top end talent is there. I will say, I tried to justify the Kyle Kuzma trade for them, and there's still a part of me that does understand it.
Yeah.
But in that playoff context, I don't know if he's going to give you enough lift defensively to offset the playmaking and just the shot making from Chris Middleton. And I feel, at least I'm sure I'm guilty of doing this, and I've just seen so much of Chris Middleton and Giannis that I'm all like, that will be top of mind for me, but I'm sure it happens elsewhere and I forget. You lose a ton of chemistry between Chris Middleton and Giannis Antetokounmpo, and that even peak Kyle Kuzma has no chance in hell of replicating any of that synergy offensively. But look, the top end talent here is still intriguing, and you have, if Giannis is healthy and Dame's had a really good year overall.
Yep.
I want to call them a contender, but I'm trying to really keep the bar, because I look at the East, and maybe this is flawed. I'm like, there can't be more than 4 real contenders in the Eastern Conference, just based off what we've seen this year. And so I find myself kind of grappling at this point. All right, there's Orlando, there's Milwaukee, there's the Knicks, and I've already said that the Pacers are one. So where am I going with the other one? Can you sell me on this team or sell me against this team? Where are you at with them?
So let me just get into the Middleton-Kuzma deal first and foremost, because here's how I viewed it. Like, they came to the realization, Milwaukee, that Chris can only give you about a half per game, like 23, 24 minutes per game. And while those minutes he's effective, like, obviously he's a very efficient shooter. He's a guy who can still set guys up. He can still do a lot of the Chris Middleton things. You just can't have them out there for 35 minutes anymore because of injury concerns, age, stamina issues, durability issues, whatever. So I think they pulled this trigger fully knowing they gave up, the superior talent. But Kuzma coming back is a guy who you can probably play 35 minutes over the course of a game. And I think that's kind of where they went. Like, okay, we can get a guy who's a little worse, potentially a lot worse if things don't shake out, but he's at least more available to us in terms of we don't have to put a minutes restriction on him. We don't have to play him just one half of basketball. We can play him 3/4. We can actually just get more minutes out of him, and that's going to presumably help our top tier talent. And I sort of get that line of thinking if that's how they approached it. That said, losing valuable shooting, efficient shooting, someone who can both score off the bounce and in catch and shoot situations, it's a gamble of dimensions. So I'm very uneasy about the trade, but I also understand they needed to do something. I just can't escape this, Dan, which is what it all boils down to, and this is me answering your question. When you have an in-prime Giannis Antetokounmpo, I just can't sit here and say, "Oh no, you're not a contender." I just can't. I'm sorry. It's extremely simplistic, but this is a legitimate MVP candidate, assuming he makes the cut for games played.
Great point.
Yeah, 32 points, 12 plus rebounds, 6 assists per game. Still solid defense despite the team ranking you just read up a couple minutes ago. This dude is it. And you have Dame, who's playing efficient basketball as a secondary guy. Are they a contender? This is like Sophie's Choice. This is so hard.
I will say their margin for errors, and this would have been true with Chris Middleton.
Yeah.
To be clear, it's just almost non-existent, because they're like a plus 4 points per 100 possessions when Brooke, Giannis, and Damian Lillard play without Chris Middleton this year. That's not that's not an elite mark. It's you're comfortably winning those minutes, but that's not a super elite mark. I do think I probably default to you that I just feel as if you have Giannis, and if you have Dame playing like this, why wouldn't you be a contender? And then I'm also like, maybe you need to open up your criteria in the East, because I feel like there are two teams that are head and shoulders above everybody else. And if you told me that Milwaukee beat Team X, whoever from the East, that wasn't one of those 2 in a 7-game series, it wouldn't shock me. Do you view them as a threat to beat either Boston or Cleveland in the East, though?
Probably more so Cleveland than Boston, because I don't know what it is. There's a history there, and Giannis seems to sometimes channel the worst version of himself against Boston. I don't know if he becomes over eager, or it's like, oh, I have to prove myself against this team, and it just doesn't work out. So there's a part of me that just goes the history there. I'm just more inclined to trust Boston than Milwaukee. But I could see them give Cleveland absolute hell. I could see Cleveland just struggling to contain Giannis in every sense of the, like, could you not see the scenario of Giannis coming into early games against Cleveland and getting immediately 2 fouls on Evan Mobley? Like, immediately. I could see that. I could see it,
but they're also just, now that you have Hunter, like, you could kind of throw him to the Wolves and have him do a lot of the Giannis stuff.
That's true. That is true.
So
it's a tough one. This is probably the toughest one for me. Like, I can't in good conscience sit here and say that a team with prime Giannis Antetokounmpo isn't a championship contender. But at the same time, Doc Rivers is still roaming that sideline. So, like,
they're
I don't even
tier
know.
2 for sure in the East, and probably if we were to tier the entire league, like, they're not a tier 2 contender overall.
No. Should we just be a little bit harsh and call them pretenders?
I think so here's what I'm struggling with, and maybe, would you rather have Chris Middleton in the role that he was playing this year, minutes and everything, and there's of course the durability aspect of it, or Kyle Kuzma because he can play 35 minutes a game or however much you want to run him out for? Because I think I would still rather have Chris Middleton, and in my head, and I just don't know whether I've just decided this is what it needs to be, that then to me is not a win now move. That was, okay, we're ducking the second apron for this year, and then, like, we're a little bit more flexible moving in to next year. And maybe they didn't want to pay Middleton long term if they thought he was going to opt out and want more money, or didn't want his player option on the books, whatever. And so I am almost inclined to call them a pretender, because, like, when you make a trade like that where I don't think it materially improves, and I think that there's an argument to be made that it actually hurts your title chances, but I don't know if I'm making that too much of a binary proposition.
No, I think that is fair, because you're also removing one of the best playmakers on the team. And, like, with all due respect to Kyle Kuzma, who can play make, who can pass, it's not in the same vicinity as Middleton too. So it's not just the scoring. Yeah, I would probably prefer the 23 minutes per game for him. I think that's basically the Bucks' issue overall, though. Like, they're so scarce on talent. Like, there's not a whole lot there when you go down the list. You were kind of hoping for more, I want to say, out of Gary Trent Jr. You were hoping for more out of Taurean Prince. You were hoping for more out of those guys. Just hasn't materialized.
I don't know if I can also take a team that actively traded for Kevin Porter Jr. this season all that seriously either.
Yep, that's fair.
Our next team, this one I'm going to twist myself into a pretzel here, I think. Mort, are the New York Knicks contenders or pretenders?
Contenders.
I think that's the fair default, but part of me wonders if it's due to a dearth of other options, because the concerns about them, the minutes of their starters, their relative shallowness, they all hold valid. The thing I just keep coming back to is, even when they're at full strength, how much does that matter with Mitchell Robinson? Like, how much does he matter on defense if you're going to play him next to Towns? And then what does that do to your offense if you're removing the 5-out element from the table for those stretches? And then I know they've recently had more what you would call trademark victories when you look at the shellacking of the Grizzlies. They beat the Rockets too, right? I think that was the game I'm referencing. But I've watched them. You've seen them against Boston this season, and it's just, they seem so far away against that team specifically. and maybe I'm overweighting that, but I don't trust their defense specifically against the better teams or overall better offenses in the NBA. And to get out of the East, you are going to have to face two of the best offenses in the NBA, in the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, and that's fair. That is where I will give you my rebuttal in terms of their offensive effectivity. I know that they're shallow, as you mentioned, but if you're going into a playoff context where rotations are going to tighten up at the very least, those guys are just going to be all playing together. And I think when you have the Jalen Brunson, Karl Anthony Towns duo as your staple, and you can adjust on a game-to-game basis, and you have Mikal Bridges, who's kind of like a free-roaming wing in terms of just shooting off the catch, also creating off the bounce. And then you have OG, who's like sort of even an afterthought at times offensively, which I think is ridiculously a major luxury to have. And then you even throw in Josh Hart, who's like, I don't want to say he's a primary playmaker because obviously Brunson is that, but like then he's second. Like is the second.
He brings the ball up the court a ton.
A ton. Yeah, exactly. And he's, your second best rebounder. He just does everything. I wrote an article about him over at Forbes last month where I actually called him a star. I think he's dramatically underrated. So offensively, I do think they can go toe to toe with a lot of these teams. Yes, the defense is where that's the sticking point, right? Can you stop them? Can you have consistent stops? And that's where maybe I still have too much faith in Tom Thibodeau to adjust on a game-to-game basis when it comes to the playoffs. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a little bit too much of a Tibbs lover.
Well, I mean, Tibbs, and if some of the minutes distributions, I know it's a tired trope, but I also think it's a valid one. I think he's proven he can be more flexible. I just don't know if they have the personnel necessary for him, because one of the things I keep coming back to as well, and maybe this is more of a testament to how well OG was pre-injury, how good Josh Hart has been. You did not, especially at the time, but even after the Karl Anthony Towns trade, you didn't acquire Mikal Bridges under the guise that he was going to be your fifth best player. Right. And that is what he has been for them this season. And that is concerning because it comes through the lens of, well, look at how good Josh Hart and Towns and OG Anunoby have been. But it just feels like, and I would say maybe, I mean, certainly on defense, but also on offense, that he might wind up mattering a lot more in the playoffs, because if you're looking for someone who's going to give you, I don't want to say an every level threat, but like Karl Anthony Towns, when he puts the ball on the floor, he's a really good passer, but kind of more from the standstill stuff. It's like if he's going to put his head down and go for drives, that's great. Physicality, aggression, but you might need Mikal Bridges if you're looking for someone who can also maybe punish teams from the perimeter off the dribble a little bit. Like that's a part of his game that has a better chance of panning out than it would for an OG Anunoby and certainly a Josh Hart, who again, maybe better decision maker with the ball in his hands, but just not as big of a threat from mid-range or three-point range.
I forget because he seems like he's been going in and out on that on the team. Landry Shamet, is he around or is he on the team or is he not?
No, he's on the team.
Not on the team. All right. Yeah.
No, he is on the team.
He is on the team. Okay, see, now I got thrown off twice again because he got waived at one point and then re-signed. And then
because he dislocated his shoulder and then they brought him back. They were also they were sort of like skirting the roster minimums and they were so close to the second apron. So,
but he's on a guaranteed now, right?
Yeah, he'll be there through the end of the season.
All right, great. See, this is a guy who I would actually empower a little bit over the course of the second half of the regular season. I understand that his long-range shooting is shaky. I understand that he's not necessarily a defensive asset, and that's what you're talking about. But if I know, if I'm the Knicks and I know that the best way for me to move forward and to actually potentially win a series, that is with overwhelming offensive volume, I'm going to need a guy to catch a rhythm before the playoffs. And Shamet, more than anyone, needs those reps. He needs that rhythm. And he should be a guy who you can sort of put into that rotation and just ask him to do one bloody thing. And that is just to penalize teams that want to double Brunson, that want to double Towns, that want to double anyone. So I do think they have a sort of solution. I'm not saying that Shamet is like a full-time starter or anything, but I don't think he's a 10-minute player as he's been this year. I think that's a little ridiculous.
How much value or intrigue do you assign to Mitchell Robinson? The Knicks apparently the latest timeline is they want him back before March 1st, but like we've heard a bunch of different timelines at this point. I think some of the things we've seen against Boston specifically is that they're just going to go after New York's weak points, where it's like Jalen Brunson, Karl-Anthony Towns. Do you think Mitchell Robinson changes that type of matchup issue enough for them defensively?
I mean, if people are going towards the rim, yeah, that's going to change things. But I also think teams are smart now, and they are probably not going to do that. Like, it seemed like Boston that averages like 48 triples per game. They're basically going to say, oh, look, Mitchell Robinson's in. Let's just take those shots and then wait for him to be taken off the floor. And then, okay, now we're going to attack the basket. What I also call the Wemby philosophy. I think teams are smart enough to do that. So it comes down to, how does Mitch influence the game on both sides of the court? Because again, you can sort of offensively game plan around minimizing his impact.
I am going to call them a contender, but I feel, like I said, who do you feel more strongly about as a contender, Indiana or New York? Or even if you want to throw Milwaukee in there, by the way. But
I feel more confident with New York than I do Milwaukee for sure. Okay. I think it's a more interesting debate with Indiana. And this is where I'm just god awful, right? Because this is where I'm just going to lean into the stardom, where I think, all right, if it's Knicks Pacers, I'm just going to trust Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns more than Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam. I think there are two offensive forces in New York that are just so devastating in terms of offensive efficiency, scoring variety. So I'm going to lean them.
Nothing written in stone for me, but I think I would probably prefer Indiana. And maybe I am reading too much into what we've seen from them recently. And then maybe I believe that their optionality will matter more in the postseason than a lot of the times. Not that optionality doesn't matter, but like, how deep are you going into, like, what lineups are you testing out at that point? Will the backup front court spots with Toppin, or if it's Thomas Bryant, or if they try to give Jarris Walker some run, how much does that matter? That's a close, but again, a couple months ago, that didn't even look like a debate. Our next team in the East, the Orlando Magic, Mort, are they a contender or big fat cowards?
They are 1 year away.
Well, I'm sorry. Without making any changes, would you view them as 1 year away, or is this a team where it's, let's get some other effing shooting in here already?
No, I'm baking in that this team is going to go into the offseason and actually try to fill out some of their holes. Can
I ask why you would bank on that when they've repeatedly shown that they're not going to do that?
Well, because I think this is the year where they kind of realize that now's the time. I mean, I hope so. Otherwise, we're looking at like Dallas Mavericks level consistency here. I mean, the need for shooting is so clear. I understand their ideology of like, let's give Paolo and Franz the ball and let's not play with a point guard because that is so 2025. No, it's not. You still need a playmaker you can give the ball to, who is on the perimeter calling out stuff. So, and I understand that they want to turn Jalen Suggs into more of a decision maker. That's great. He's not that guy. He's a defensive dynamo, but he's an off guard. Let's just be real about it. Like, the sooner they accept this, the better. Like, you can call him a combo if you want, but that doesn't make him a point. He's just not a point. Anthony Black, I like, but the shooting is a concern still. And we knew he was going to be a project. But if you want to win now, if you want to win within the next couple of years, rather, you just don't have the patience. You're not saying you can't give him minutes, but like, you can't throw him into like a starting role, for example. I don't think, unless he comes back and is like half Steph Curry next year. So they will have to find a point guard who can space the floor. They will have to make some moves. I'm guessing Kobe White is going to be a name that they have circled for next season. That wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. I think he would fit in well there. But as of this year, I can't call him a contender when they're hitting 30% of their threes. I'm sorry. And I know that's not.
The only thing that I could actually disagree with on you is that you have more faith in them moving forward than I do. Because the talent is there, but I do think that they've kind of focused on, we can't play guys with defensive or target guys who might be defensive liabilities. That type of mindset, I think, is really harshed the variability of their offense. And maybe it looked like the way that Franz was playing at the beginning of the year, and I had him on the back of my MVP ballot. But part of, if you want the Orlando Magic to get attention, is they need to be held to like this higher bar. And to me, I would even take it one step further and say, yeah, I agree about their biggest need. But if they wanted to play the way they're playing now, if you want to test out that type of usage from Jalen Suggs, bring in more shooting somehow. That is absolutely a trade you didn't have to go all in on to acquire someone like that. And I worry that, is losing in the postseason or the play-in tournament, whatever it ends up being, exactly the way we're expecting you to lose, because that's what happened last year in the playoffs. Yep. Will that be the wake-up call they need? I don't know if I have a ton of faith for it with them. And that's, to me, that's a bummer, because I really do believe in a lot of the talent here. And of course, specifically Paolo, even though he hasn't played great since coming back from injury. Franz too suffered a little bit. Like I really do believe in those guys now. There's not enough like variance in their offense to where it's Mort, they can't shoot right now. Yep. Why don't they run? This team it's not the most athletic team, but you can run with these guys. And yet after live rebounds, they just slow it down. And it's sort of like watching them. You're not going to create enough advantages that way because you don't have the shooters in the half court to leverage around Paolo and Franz. And I don't know why this makes me so angry, but like they're a team that's, you know what it is? I read too much into them when they first signed KCP. I knew that didn't fix everything, but I was like, they've entered their aggressive era. And it was just, that was just sort of like
that signing from the get-go. I hated it. I really hated it.
To be fair, he's the one since January 1st who's kind of been hitting threes in the rotation.
Great. And then we ignore the first couple of months of the season. By the way, they have a solution who's healthy and on their roster. Well, I don't want to say like a solidified solution, but like they have a guy who they should play a ton to see if you can actually fix some of those issues. Jet Howard, you have a 6'8" guy who moves very, very well, who shoots at a high volume from three, historically is a pretty good shooter, could actually be more than just good if he gets the reps and if he gets the opportunity. But no, 11 minutes per game, just limited opportunities where I'm like, really? You want to go that route instead? That's you want to go towards like, I don't know, Gary Harris instead? Caleb Houston, why?
Doesn't it come back to a little bit what I was saying of they seem so reticent to play guys who can become defensive liabilities? And it's even with all the injuries they've dealt through, but you have the defensive infrastructure to shoulder more of these minutes. And you could say, look, the minutes that I've seen from Jet Howard this year, I haven't come away thinking that he's spectacular and going to answer everything, but he is, in terms of options at your disposal now, because we're past the trade deadline. Like he's one of the better ones for what you need.
Yeah. And I don't even think he's that bad defensively from what we've seen. Also, granted, the sample size is small, so they have more data on him from practice and whatnot, but his frame alone is pretty big. Like I just don't mind giving him a real shot. Like give him a shake, like devote the next 20 games of the season and say, okay, look, he's going to have a place in the rotation, not 10 minutes, 11 minutes per game, just 20, 25. See what you have in him.
The one thing you said that caught me off guard, and I've gotten these wrong all the time, but is he 6'8"? I just looked because the NBA has him at 6'6".
No, I'm pretty sure he's 6'8".
Well, that's even more inexcusable than if he's actually 6'8". I thought I had LaMelo's height wrong at one point too. I thought he was 6'5" or 6'6".
I will tell you firsthand, I was in New York during the draft in 2023, and I spoke with him. I interviewed him. I'm 6'4" in shoes, and he towered over me, and you wouldn't tower actually, I have a better one because my brother was with me, and in his shoes, he's 6'6". And Jet
Your brother's huge.
Yes, you've met him. Yes, you have. And he's 6'6" in shoes. And I think we were the ones who asked him the last question during media availability, and he got up and left, and he walked past us, and he was clearly taller than my brother by a couple of inches. So if that's listed at 6'6", I have some questions.
B-ball has him at 6'8", but I don't know, like the NBA I think now uses without shoes, right? Unless I have that wrong, and B-ball ref might not. I don't know. If he's 6'8", he could have, by the way, he was young enough to where he could have theoretically grew. He's 21.
Right.
So he came in the league at what was 19, 20. So like if he's actually 6'8", this is good. That makes me even angrier.
I'm pretty sure he is. Look, I can say with absolute certainty, again, from personal experience here of just having stood right next to him and my brother, that he's more than 6'6", for damn sure.
So yeah, I can't, it seems like to their, like, this is not a Milwaukee Bucks style when we were talking about the Knicks. This is by design. I don't think they were expecting to get there, but I think they had the talent, at least at full strength, to where if they would have made some moves, maybe one of which could have been really aggressive, whether it was over the offseason or leading into the trade deadline, this could be a different conversation right now.
Yep.
That's the only core list of teams that we have. I don't know if you believe that we're going to talk about some rebuilding squads in the coming week or so as well. I don't know if you thought that Chicago or Atlanta or Toronto, or I think Detroit would be the tougher cut here, but they seem to have entered their, like, almost their Orlando Magic era in the sense of different teams, but okay, they're good now, but they're still sort of rebuilding because they are, like, still bringing along these other younger guys, and they're not meant to, they might make the playoffs this year. Okay, great. But I don't view them as a, and I'm sure some Pistons fans will take this as an insult, but I just don't view them as a threat to win the title. If they could do things in free agency over the offseason, it seems like they're approaching sort of that stage of their existence.
Right. I just have to ask, did the Pistons get prime Grant Hill back? Because if not, no, they're just not deserving on being on this
prime
list.
Grant Hill was a problem. That is just one of the bigger what-if careers.
He was an enigma. You couldn't do jack about that dude.
If he never gets injured, I feel like he's just in the GOAT debates is probably extreme, but, like, he's probably, like, top 10, top 15. All, like, that was just a level of talent and versatility that Grant Hill had to me.
Right.
Anyway.
No, he would have been in that conversation. I think it would have come down to titles, right? Because, again, like, would he have ever won a title in Detroit? I think they just failed to build a proper team around him for all those years. Then he went to Orlando. Like, okay, T-Mac, does T-Mac become that version if Grant was fully healthy? I don't know the answer to that. There are a lot of ripple effects here, but Grant was, I mean, look, I love Grant Hughes. Grant Hill, slightly above. I'm sorry, just slightly above your co-host.
I would never. Grant Hughes is unimpeachable on this podcast. I will say, and I say this without a hint of snark, there was, I think it was, I can't remember which reporter it was from Detroit, said that Dennis Schroeder was beaming, like, after the trade of the Pistons. And I was like, that's really cool. That, like, we've reached a point where Detroit is good enough to where guys are, even it wasn't necessarily specific to Dennis Schroeder wanting to leave the Warriors for the Pistons. Right. Like, this team is, I thought they had a really solid deadline, the way that they used their cap space to bring in someone like Dennis Schroeder, who peak Dennis Schroeder probably fills their biggest need in the wake of the Jaden Ivey injury. So that's just a team. I have them pegged as a team to watch, like, as we're going into the offseason and next year, to see what they can do, what they will do, and whether they actually do take that next step. They're not there now, and they're not supposed to be.
No.
Do you have anything else to add, or would you be able to tell our fine listeners and watchers where they can find you and all the stuff that you do?
Yes, you can find me over at Blue Sky, first and foremost. That's where I spend most of my time. I have moved on from the Elon Musk hellhole, and you can find me at MSJ NBA over there. I usually share, well, most of my stuff because I'm so horrible at remembering to link to my stuff. This is like a real problem that I have. Otherwise, you can follow my work over at Yahoo Sports. You can follow my work at Forbes. I'm actually taking a bit of a break from Sports Illustrated, but if you want to go back and read some of my old stuff, you can. That is your right to do so. You can also check out the NBA podcast where I am, and if by some miracle you speak Danish or understand Danish, you can check out the podcast called Buzzer Beater.
You didn't teach me a Danish word this podcast. We had a rule that you're going to teach me one Danish word.
That's true. See, I'm so glad. Okay, I have a good one for you, actually. Solbriller.
One more time.
Solbriller.
Solbriller?
Mm-hmm. Means sunglasses.
Sunglasses?
Yeah.
All right. Solbriller.
And it's a direct translation too. Sun and glasses.
Okay. Solbriller.
Solbriller. So
Solbriller.
Sol is the sun, and briller is glasses.
I favorite. I don't know how to. I kind of know how to. I have like a borderline speech impediment with how nasally I am.
I actually think you did it okay. Look, that was a tough word I threw at you right there because brella is like a very tough way for, like, the E in that word. It's spelled Briller, and the way that we say the E sound over here, that is something that virtually no American really does. The ER is like not, you say we say yeah. And it's
so please.
Yeah.
I'm going to mess it up now, but stay tuned for the next edition of Dan Learns a Danish Word when we do the Western Conference contender or pretender exercise. Until next time, and as always, on Mort and myself's behalf, shout out to Frank Ntilikina.